Hi everyone, I'm Longoria. I'm an assistant professor of secondary education at Western Washington University and co-chair of the Queer Studies SIG. I am also speaking to you from the traditional lands of the Lummi and Nooksack people and of unrecognized Coast Salish people that have been here since time immemorial in what we call Bellingham, Washington. So I've been asked to respond to the questions posed, and so I thought that I'd respond to them a little bit more organically. And I would say that above all, I think that the questions made me mindful of identity and its bearing on our work. I speak to you as the grandchild of immigrants from China and Mexico, and I'm very mindful in this work of the spaces that I find myself in and being who I am in the spaces that I find myself in. And I don't mean this historionically. I feel the weight of my ancestors in this work, and by that I mean I feel the weight of people who have come before me, and I also feel the weight of people who have not been able to come before me. I think who we are matters in this work, and I'm not the first to say that, but I hope that serves as a reminder, if you will, of that notion. I come from the field of multicultural education, and one of its figures is James Banks, who's a former AERA president. And in 1998, in his presidential address, he spoke about the concept of the researcher's epistemological journey and its influences on the lives of researchers. And he wrote, a quote here, "I now believe that the biographical journeys of researchers greatly influence their values, their research questions, and the knowledge they construct. The knowledge they construct mirrors their life experiences and their values." And this is a refrain that he's repeated a lot in his career. And it makes me mindful of the way that identity informs the kinds of questions that we pursue in our inquiry, the way that we interpret data, the way that we vet scholarship. It also makes me think of what does it mean for queers of color? What does it mean for me as a teacher educator? What does it mean for praxis in teacher education? But undoubtedly, it has informed my own line of scholarly inquiry. I should also say, too, that I think even when we're not doing work, and especially for me, even when I'm not doing work that's perhaps explicitly queer, I think there's still an active queering, if you will, of the work that I do. And I think from that, it's how we embody our work. And so perhaps thinking about identity in a different way, how are we embodying our identities in our work? That's definitely part of my emerging scholarly agenda, is thinking about the ways that we embody our identities in our work. But from my own work, it's emerging. I know that I'm still the junior of junior faculty, and my work perhaps has not found its solo line above the orchestra yet. But perhaps me being recently out of grad school within the last couple of years and finding myself in this junior faculty role, perhaps this advice can serve more as an imaginary for what's more immediately possible. I think too often, on that note, we limit ourselves in thinking, gosh, if I was only ready, or if I only had this publication, or I encourage you to think that you're already ready. I really hope you see that sometimes our adherence to these ideas of readiness or good enoughness can really hold us back. My advice for that is to study and inquire in earnest, and to be be able to stand in readiness for the opportunities that arise. On that note, I think that COVID-19 has affected the way that we stand in readiness. I must say that I don't think that COVID-19 has changed the core of my scholarly inquiry. It's definitely changed the how, though. I think we do this work differently now. I think that there's a different kind of time. We don't necessarily have more time or less time, but I'm sure you've also experienced that time is definitely different now. Perhaps that's because of our virtual interactions. Perhaps that's simply because of the pandemic's effect on the way that we do work. Regardless, I think our responses to where we find ourselves today has affected how we do our work. And I think to that end, it's affected how we think about productivity and success. And I guess my advice would be here that I hope you see that you're always writing. And now all of this is to say that your dissertation is still due, you still need to file, your thesis is still due, your proposal is still due, you still need to get those revisions done. I don't mean that, but I hope that you give yourself grace to see that you're always writing, that you're always inquiring, you're always doing work, and giving yourself that grace to acknowledge that when you stop to write a post-it down, or if you're like me, you're actually writing probably more on the notes app on your phone than in front of a computer screen, but that's still doing work. And perhaps in this COVID-19 time, perhaps now is a really good time to acknowledge that that's also writing and productivity. I'm not saying do your Netflix binge as your praxis, but I am saying do see that, or do recognize and give yourself that grace in acknowledging that you are getting this work done. And to that end, I'd say my greatest hope then is that you embrace your epistemological journey, you embrace that through line that I hope you find in your scholarship, a through line that informs your service and your teaching, and that that might even be informed by your values. And I hope that you find whatever it is that can be the meaningful contribution you can make to knowledge. I hope that you see that you're already ready. I hope that you see that you've already been vetted through your grad program's applications, and you're already ready. And I think as the field, we're waiting for you. We're waiting for your contribution. Now, related to the second question, all of that is to say that yes, there are illogical processes to hiring, and there are budget constraints and all kinds of things. And perhaps maybe in this moment, your contribution isn't what's sought. But I hope that you see that having that meaningful contribution and through line can be more important than trying to map on falsely your work onto some job call. And to that end, I would say that there is space for your contributions, but sometimes it's not always the way that we had imagined. Sometimes it's simply different. Sometimes it's in academia, sometimes it's outside of academia. But thinking about what is that contribution that you'd like to make to higher ed, I think that is part of the through line that I hope that you pursue. Ultimately, I think that this work is a kind of stewardship of knowledge, and for our SIG in particular, it's the the stewardship of knowledge around queer studies and education. I see that as a very powerful nexus between multiple fields in a field like education that's already by its nature hybridized and interdisciplinary. There's so much potentiality. There's so much what some scholars call endless becoming of queerness and queer bodies. I think that there's endless becoming also and potentiality in our field. I hope that we collectively embrace that. I hope that other scholars of education embrace that as well. But I invoke that notion because I hope you see that there's also possibility for you to facilitate that kind of potentiality. And maybe there's also a moral dimension there to that work too. And I bring all of this up as a sort of final point because I'm mindful of the 2021 annual meeting theme. And in the theme of accepting educational responsibility, I think it's an act of educational responsibility for us to really interrogate our identities and their bearing on this work, for us to think about our work's effect on queer people in education. And I hope that by finding that through line in your work, you identify what your commitments are to this stewardship of knowledge and to your own path and your own journey. In this year of reckonings and of adjustments and so much change, I think it's important to revisit or find our commitments in this work. And I know that there's so much advice being thrown at you, and this series has given you even more. Perhaps then the advice is that you sit with all of this, even amid everything that is going on in this year, and that I hope that you might find a path that lives out your values and ultimately helps steward this enormous trove of knowledge for future researchers. And I hope that you might find your place in that, your contribution, if you will. So I hope you stayed and come along on this little ranting journey. Thank you for allowing me to share some of my thoughts. And I wish you well, and I hope that you are well. Thank you.